Evelyn hauled 200 pounds of fresh meat down the frozen trail, unaware that 20 years of secret rituals were about to turn into something far more dangerous. When the enormous alpha wolf sat before her like a tamed dog, she knew she had crossed a line there was no coming back from. The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow, each syllable carving deeper into her chest than the last. "You lack the spiritual strength necessary to stand beside someone of my lineage." Marcus's voice carried across the ceremonial circle, his rejection echoing off the ancient stone walls that had witnessed countless mating ceremonies, but never one quite like this. The silence that followed was deafening. Every member of the mountain community stood frozen, their faces a mixture of shock and pity that made Evelyn's skin crawl. She could feel their eyes boring into her, dissecting her humiliation with the precision of scavengers picking at roadkill. Her hands trembled at her sides, fingers digging into the ceremonial white dress her grandmother had sewn with such pride just weeks before. 23 years of dreaming about this moment, of believing she was worthy of love, of thinking Marcus saw something special in her beyond her family's respected bloodline. 23 years reduced to ash in less than 30 seconds. The ceremonial fire crackled behind her, its warmth a mockery against the ice spreading through her veins. Elder Thorn cleared his throat, the ancient leader's weathered face creased with uncertainty. In all his decades of presiding over mating ceremonies, he had never witnessed a public rejection during the sacred rite. The old traditions provided no roadmap for this level of humiliation. "Perhaps," Elder Thorn began carefully, his voice barely above a whisper, "there has been some misunderstanding. The bonds revealed during the awakening ceremony are sacred, Marcus. They are not to be questioned lightly." Marcus stepped forward, his dark hair catching the firelight as he shook his head with infuriating confidence. "There is no misunderstanding, Elder. I have looked into my heart, consulted the ancient signs, and found her lacking. Evelyn Winters may carry a respected family name, but respect alone cannot bridge the gap between what I need in a mate and what she can provide." The cruelty of his words was matched only by their calculated precision. He wasn't speaking from passion or fear, but from cold, deliberate judgment. That realization cut deeper than anything else because it meant this wasn't a mistake he might later regret. This was his truth, spoken without hesitation before their entire world. Evelyn's mother, Helena, moved to step forward, but Evelyn caught her wrist. She wouldn't hide behind her family's protection, wouldn't give Marcus or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing her crumble completely. Whatever fragments of dignity remained, she would gather them around herself like armor. "I understand," Evelyn managed, her voice steadier than she had any right to expect. "I release you from any obligation the awakening ceremony may have implied." The formal words of dissolution felt like poison on her tongue, but she spoke them clearly, ensuring every person in attendance heard her acceptance of this devastating fate. If Marcus wanted to cast her aside like damaged goods, she wouldn't give him the pleasure of begging. But even as she spoke the ritual phrases, a part of her soul began to wither. The little girl who had grown up believing in destined love, in the sacred bonds that tied hearts together across lifetimes, died in that circle of witnesses. What remained was something harder, more pragmatic, and infinitely lonelier. The ceremony dissolved into uncomfortable murmurs and awkward shuffling as people struggled to process what they had witnessed. Some shot sympathetic glances in Evelyn's direction, while others whispered behind cupped hands, already turning her tragedy into gossip fodder. She caught fragments of their speculation, each word another small blade finding its mark. Always knew she was too bookish for someone like Marcus. Poor thing, but perhaps it's for the best. His family line requires strength. The Winters curse continues. Remember how her aunt never found a proper match? Evelyn walked through the crowd with measured steps, neither hurrying nor dawdling, refusing to give them the satisfaction of witnessing her complete collapse. Her family followed at a respectful distance, understanding instinctively that she needed space to process this public evisceration of her dreams. The walk home felt endless. Every familiar landmark along the winding mountain path seemed to mock her now, transformed by the knowledge that she would forever be the girl who wasn't good enough, who lacked whatever mysterious quality Marcus had found essential. The cottage that had always represented safety and belonging suddenly felt like a prison, its windows staring down at her with the same judgmental gaze she'd faced in the ceremonial circle. Inside, her mother immediately busied herself with tea preparation, the familiar ritual offering comfort through routine. Her father, Thomas, sat heavily in his worn leather chair, his weathered hands clasped together as he struggled to find words that might ease his daughter's pain. Her younger brother, Daniel, hovered near the doorway, his 15-year-old understanding insufficient to grasp the full magnitude of what had occurred. "He's a fool," Thomas finally said, his voice rough with suppressed anger. "Any man who would reject a daughter of mine publicly without even the courtesy of private discussion isn't worthy of our family's tears." But Evelyn knew it wasn't that simple. Marcus wasn't cruel by nature, wasn't the type to inflict pain for sport. His rejection had been deliberate and considered, which meant he genuinely believed she was inadequate. That knowledge settled in her stomach like a stone, heavy and indigestible. The following days blurred together in a haze of well-meaning visitors and carefully worded condolences. Friends stopped by with covered dishes and sympathetic expressions, their kindness somehow making everything worse. Each gesture of support reminded her that everyone in their tight-knit community now saw her as an object of pity, someone to be handled with extra care because of her obvious deficiency. She threw herself into her work at the community library, finding solace in the familiar routine of cataloging historical documents and maintaining the extensive collection of local folklore. The ancient books didn't judge, didn't whisper about her failures, or speculate about what she might have done differently. Among the leather-bound volumes and handwritten chronicles, she could almost forget that she was now the cautionary tale mothers would use to teach their daughters about the uncertainty of love. It was during one of these therapeutic cataloging sessions, exactly 3 weeks after the ceremony that had redefined her existence, that he first appeared. The library door opened with its characteristic creak, drawing her attention from a particularly fascinating manuscript about seasonal festivals. She glanced up expecting to see Mrs. Patterson returning her usual selection of romance novels, but instead found herself looking at a stranger whose presence seemed to fill the entire room. He was tall, probably 6'3", with the kind of broad shoulders that suggested physical labor despite his obviously expensive clothing. Dark hair with threads of silver at the temples framed a face that belonged in the old paintings hanging in the town hall, all strong angles and classical proportions. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch, golden amber like honey held up to sunlight, containing depths that seemed to invite exploration. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't immediately place. "I was told this would be the best place to learn about local traditions and history." Evelyn set down her cataloging pen, suddenly conscious of her plain wool dress and the fact that she'd pulled her chestnut hair back in a practical bun rather than styling it properly. "Not at all. That's exactly what we're here for. I'm Evelyn Winters, the head librarian." "Adrian Blackthorne," he replied, extending a hand that engulfed hers when she accepted the greeting. His skin was surprisingly warm, almost fevered, yet his touch sent an unexpected shiver up her arm. "I'm something of a traveling merchant, but I have a particular interest in the folklore of mountain communities." There was something about the way he said it that suggested layers of meaning beneath the surface, but Evelyn was too intrigued by his presence to analyze the sensation. After weeks of pitying stares and careful conversations, speaking with someone who looked at her with genuine interest rather than sympathy felt like stepping into sunlight, after a long winter. "Well, you've certainly come to the right place," she said, leading him toward the folklore section. "Our collection dates back to the original settlement. Some of these manuscripts are 300 years old, and they document traditions that are even older." As she pulled volumes from the shelves, explaining the significance of various festivals and customs, Adrian listened with an intensity that was both flattering and slightly unsettling. He asked questions that demonstrated not just polite interest, but genuine understanding of the complexities involved in preserving oral traditions. His knowledge of comparative folklore was impressive for a merchant, and several times he offered insights that made her reconsider interpretations she'd held for years. "The Moonrise Festival," he said, running his finger along a passage in one of the older texts. "The description here suggests it was more than just seasonal celebration. The language implies it had protective purposes, as if the community was warding against something specific." Evelyn leaned closer to see what he was referencing, catching a scent that reminded her of pine forests and winter nights. "You're right. I've always wondered about that too. Some of the older residents still treat it with a seriousness that seems disproportionate to a harvest festival. My grandmother used to say there were things in the mountains that were better left undisturbed." "Wise woman," Adrian murmured, and something in his tone made her look up sharply. For just a moment, those golden eyes seemed to hold secrets much older than his apparent 35 years, but when she blinked, the impression passed. They spent the better part of 3 hours going through documents, Adrian proving to be the most engaging research partner she'd encountered in years. He treated her expertise with respect, building on her observations rather than dismissing them, and never once did his expression shift into the careful pity that had become her constant companion since the ceremony. When closing time arrived, Evelyn found herself reluctant to end their conversation. "If you're staying in town for a while, you're welcome to return. We have additional collections that might interest you, and I could show you some of the actual festival sites if you'd like." "I'd like that very much," Adrian replied, his smile transforming his austere features into something genuinely warm. "I have the feeling this community has much more to teach me than I initially expected." After he left, Evelyn remained in the library longer than usual, ostensibly to finish her cataloging, but really to replay their conversation and examine the unexpected lightness she felt. For the first time since Marcus's rejection, she had spent hours without thinking about her inadequacy, without measuring herself against some impossible standard, and finding herself lacking. That night, as she walked home through the familiar streets, she noticed things that had escaped her attention for weeks. The way the evening light painted the mountain peaks gold and purple, the comfortable sounds of families settling into their dinner routines, the scent of wood smoke from chimneys preparing for the cooler nights ahead. It was as if Adrian's presence had returned color to a world that had been drained gray by heartbreak. But as she prepared for bed, practical questions began to intrude on her improved mood. What did she really know about this stranger who had appeared so conveniently just when she needed distraction from her troubles? His expensive clothes and refined manner suggested wealth, but what kind of merchant had such extensive knowledge of obscure folklore? And why had his touch affected her so strongly when she had thought herself immune to masculine attention after Marcus's brutal assessment of her worth? Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of golden eyes and shadows that moved with purpose through moonlit forests. She woke several times with the distinct impression that something important was happening just beyond the edge of her understanding. But morning light always dissolved the feeling before she could grasp its meaning. The next day brought an unexpected visitor in the form of Marcus himself, appearing at the library door with an expression that mixed determination with something that might have been regret. Evelyn's stomach dropped at the sight of him, all the carefully rebuilt confidence from her encounter with Adrian crumbling like a house of cards. "I need to speak with you," Marcus said without preamble, glancing around the empty library with obvious relief that they wouldn't have witnesses to whatever he planned to say. "I thought you had said everything necessary 3 weeks ago," Evelyn replied, proud of how steady her voice remained despite the way her hands shook as she set down her pen. "That's just it, Evelyn. I don't think I explained myself properly. The rejection, it wasn't about you personally. It was about the requirements of my position, the expectations that come with my family's responsibilities to the community." She stared at him, waiting for an explanation that might make sense of the worst night of her life. Marcus ran a hand through his dark hair, the gesture achingly familiar from all the times she had imagined smoothing those same strands herself. "My grandfather has been having dreams," he continued, his voice dropping as if he feared being overheard. "Prophetic dreams that suggest changes are coming to our community, challenges that will require a mate who can handle things that go beyond normal human experience." The words hung in the air between them, laden with implications that made Evelyn's pulse quicken. What kind of changes? Marcus shook his head, frustration clear in every line of his body. "I can't explain it properly because I don't fully understand it myself. But the dreams show a time when our community will need protection from forces that most people would refuse to believe exist. My mate will need to be someone who can stand firm in the face of the impossible, who has strength that goes beyond the physical or emotional. And you decided I lack that strength based on what evidence?" The question came out sharper than she intended, fueled by 3 weeks of suppressed anger and hurt. "Based on your nature, Evelyn. You're gentle, scholarly, someone who finds comfort in books and quiet contemplation. When the time comes to face whatever is heading toward us, I need someone fierce beside me, someone who won't hesitate to fight for survival." The assumption in his words ignited something dangerous in Evelyn's chest, a fury she hadn't known she possessed. "You think you know my nature? You think because I prefer reading to gossip, because I find peace in learning rather than drama, that I'm somehow weak? That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. You looked at me and saw someone soft, someone who would crumble under pressure, and you made that judgment without ever bothering to discover who I actually am beneath your preconceptions." Marcus stepped back, startled by the steel in her voice, the fire in her eyes that he had never seen before. For the first time since entering the library, he looked uncertain, as if he might have miscalculated something fundamental. But before he could respond, the library door opened again, and Adrian walked in with perfect timing that felt almost orchestrated. He took in the scene immediately, his golden eyes shifting between Evelyn's flushed face and Marcus's defensive posture with an assessment that was both swift and accurate. "I apologize for interrupting," Adrian said smoothly, though his tone suggested he wasn't particularly sorry. "I can return later if you're occupied with community business." "Actually," Evelyn said, making a decision that surprised even her, "your timing is perfect. Marcus was just leaving." She turned back to her former intended mate, her chin raised with new determination. "I think we've said everything necessary, don't you? You made your assessment of my character and found me wanting. I accept that judgment, but don't expect me to be grateful for your condescending explanations after the fact." Marcus looked between them again, something flickering in his expression that might have been jealousy or simply surprise at this unknown side of Evelyn's personality. "This conversation isn't over," he said finally, but it sounded more like a question than a statement. "Yes, it is," Evelyn replied with finality that left no room for argument. After Marcus left, Adrian approached her desk with careful steps, as if she might bolt if he moved too quickly. "Are you all right?" That seemed like an intense discussion. "I'm better than all right," Evelyn said, and realized with surprise that it was true. Something had shifted during her confrontation with Marcus, some internal barrier breaking down to reveal strength she hadn't known existed. I'm finally understanding some things about myself that I should have recognized years ago. Adrian smiled, and once again she was struck by how the expression transformed his entire face. Good for you. In my experience, the most important discoveries are usually the ones we make about our own capabilities. As the day progressed, Evelyn found herself wondering about the timing of Adrian's arrival, both in town and at the library that morning. But rather than arousing suspicion, the coincidence felt like a gift from whatever forces govern the universe, a reminder that her story wasn't over just because Marcus had decided she wasn't suitable for his chapter. But what happened that night would change everything, setting in motion events that would force Evelyn to discover just how much strength she actually possessed, and reveal that her quiet life in the mountains was about to become anything but peaceful. That night, Evelyn was awakened by sounds that had no place in the peaceful mountain village. Low growls echoed through the darkness, accompanied by the crash of something heavy moving through the forest behind her family's cottage. She sat up in bed, her heart hammering against her ribs as she strained to identify what could be making such disturbing noises. The sounds came again, closer this time, and she could swear she heard voices mixed with the animal cries. But not normal voices. These were deep and guttural, as if human throats were struggling to form words around shapes they weren't designed to accommodate. Moving to her bedroom window, Evelyn pushed aside the curtain and peered into the moonlit yard. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the familiar silhouettes of the garden shed and her mother's prized rose bushes. Then movement in the tree line caught her attention, shadows that seemed too large and moved with too much purpose to be natural wildlife. A figure emerged from the forest, walking upright, but with a gait that was unmistakably inhuman. Even from a distance, she could see that its proportions were wrong. Arms too long, shoulders too broad, head positioned at an angle that suggested a snout rather than a human face. It paused at the edge of their property, turned toward the house, and she would have sworn it looked directly at her window. Fear should have paralyzed her, but instead, Evelyn found herself moving with surprising decisiveness. She grabbed the heavy flashlight from her nightstand, pulled on her robe and crept downstairs, avoiding the creaky third step that would wake her parents. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was foolish, that she should wake her father or hide until morning. But a deeper instinct insisted that running would only make whatever was outside more dangerous. She slipped through the back door, grateful that her father had recently oiled the hinges, and stepped onto the porch. The night air was surprisingly warm for late autumn, carrying scents of pine and something musky that made her nostrils flare involuntarily. The forest had gone completely silent, as if every creature within miles was holding its breath. "I know you're there," she called softly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Whatever you are, whatever you want, hiding in the shadows won't accomplish it." The silence stretched until she began to wonder if she had imagined the entire encounter. Then a voice answered from the darkness, unmistakably Adrian's voice, but rough with strain. "You should go back inside, Evelyn. Please. This isn't something you want to see." Relief flooded through her at the familiar sound, but it was immediately replaced by concern. Adrian sounded hurt, or at least deeply distressed. "Are you injured? What's happening out there?" "Nothing you need to worry about. Just go inside and forget you saw anything." But Evelyn had spent her entire life being told what she should and shouldn't do, what she was capable of handling. And Marcus's rejection had crystallized something rebellious in her nature. "I'm not going anywhere until I know you're all right." She stepped off the porch, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness as she walked toward the forest. With each step, her heart beat faster, but not entirely from fear. There was something else driving her forward, an inexplicable pull that seemed to emanate from the woods themselves. "Evelyn, stop!" Adrian's voice was closer now, though she still couldn't see him. "Please, I'm asking you to trust me and go back to the house. Instead, she continued walking, guided by instincts she didn't understand. The flashlight beam swept across the tree line, illuminating nothing but ordinary forest until it landed on a figure crouched behind a massive oak tree. It was Adrian, but not as she had ever seen him. His expensive clothes were torn, hanging in shreds from a frame that seemed somehow larger than it had been that afternoon. His face was partially obscured by shadows, but she could see that his features had changed, becoming sharper and more angular. Most disturbing of all, his golden eyes now seemed to glow with their own light, reflecting her flashlight beam like an animal's. "What happened to you?" she whispered, lowering the flashlight slightly so it wouldn't shine directly in his face. "Nothing happened to me," Adrian replied, his voice carrying undertones that raised goosebumps on her arms. "This is what I am, what I've always been. I was hoping you wouldn't have to see it so soon. What you are." The question came out barely audible, though every word resonated through her bones. Adrian rose slowly, his movements fluid despite his obvious distress. As he stepped into the moonlight, Evelyn could see the full extent of the changes. His canine teeth had elongated into fangs, his fingernails had become claws, and his hair had grown wilder, appearing almost to flow with a life of its own. But it was the way he held himself that truly marked the transformation, with a predatory grace that spoke of strength far beyond human limitations. "I'm what your folklore books call a shapeshifter, Evelyn. A creature that exists between human and wolf, never fully belonging to either world." The words should have terrified her, should have sent her running back to the safety of her family's cottage. Instead, she found herself taking another step closer, drawn by a fascination that overrode common sense. "Show me," she said, surprising them both with her boldness. "You don't know what you're asking." "Yes, I do. I'm asking to see the truth, all of it. I'm tired of people deciding what I can and can't handle." Adrian studied her for a long moment, those glowing eyes searching her face for signs of fear or revulsion. Finding neither, he nodded slowly and stepped back to give himself space. The transformation was unlike anything Evelyn had ever imagined. His body seemed to flow like liquid, bones and muscles reshaping themselves with sounds that should have been horrifying, but somehow struck her as natural. His remaining clothes fell away as his form expanded, arms becoming forelegs, face elongating into a muzzle filled with gleaming teeth. Within moments, where Adrian had stood now, crouched a wolf of impossible size, silver-black fur rippling in the moonlight, golden eyes fixed on her with intelligence that was unmistakably human. Evelyn's breath came in short gasps, not from fear, but from awe. The creature before her was magnificent, radiating power and grace that made her understand why ancient cultures had worshipped beings like this. She found herself taking another step forward, then another, until she stood within arm's reach of jaws that could easily tear her apart. "You're beautiful," she whispered, and meant it. The great head tilted, studying her reaction, then Adrian began the transformation back to human form. This time, she watched more carefully, fascinated by the way his essence seemed to remain constant even as his physical form shifted. When the change was complete, he stood naked before her, moonlight painting his human skin silver and making the scattered scars across his chest and shoulders visible for the first time. "You're not afraid," he said, and it wasn't quite a question. "I should be," Evelyn replied honestly. "Everything I thought I knew about the world just changed in the space of 5 minutes. But afraid? No. I feel like I'm finally seeing something real, something that explains why nothing in my life has ever felt quite right." Adrian reached for his torn shirt, pulling it on despite its ruined state. "This is why I came to your community, Evelyn. Not for trade or academic interest in folklore. I came because I've been dreaming about you for months, dreams that showed me a woman who could stand in the presence of monsters and see beauty instead of terror." Dreams? Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried perfectly in the still night air. Prophetic dreams. They run in my bloodline, though I've never experienced them with such clarity before. Night after night I saw your face, heard your voice, felt your presence like a beacon calling me home. I've traveled thousands of miles following that call, never knowing if I would find you or if the dreams were just wishful thinking. Evelyn's mind reeled with the implications. But that means, when Marcus rejected me, when he said I lacked the strength to handle things beyond normal human experience, he sensed something about your true nature, even if he couldn't identify what it was. People with supernatural bloodlines often recognize potential in others, even when that potential is still dormant. Supernatural bloodlines? The phrase sent chills down her spine. What are you saying about my family? Adrian stepped closer, his expression gentle despite the predatory gleam that still lingered in his eyes. I'm saying that your attraction to folklore, your ability to see truth in stories others dismiss as fantasy, your intuitive understanding of ancient traditions, they're all signs of heritage that goes deeper than your family's official history. Before she could ask more questions, sounds from the forest interrupted them. The same growls and crashes that had first awakened her, but closer now and definitely heading in their direction. Adrian's head snapped toward the noise, his body tensing with alertness that was purely animal. We need to get you back to the house, he said urgently. Now. What is it? What's coming? Others like me, but not friendly. They've been tracking my scent for days, and I led them straight to you. Self-recrimination filled his voice as he grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the cottage. I should have left the moment I found you, should have known they would follow. They had barely taken 3 steps when shapes burst from the tree line, moving within human speed. Evelyn caught glimpses of forms that shifted between human and wolf, creatures that snarled with voices that held traces of speech. There were at least 5 of them, possibly more, and they moved to surround Adrian and her with practiced coordination. Adrian Blackthorn, one of them called, its words slurred by fangs and an elongated jaw. The great Supreme Alpha, running away with his tail between his legs. Supreme Alpha. The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow, revealing another layer to Adrian's identity that she hadn't suspected. These weren't just random, supernatural creatures. They were part of some larger political structure, and Adrian held a position of significant power within it. Cassius, Adrian replied, his voice carrying authority that made the air around them seem to vibrate. You're trespassing in territory under my protection. Leave now, and I'll forget this transgression. The creature that had spoken, apparently their leader, laughed with a sound that raised every hair on Evelyn's arms. Your protection? You mean this little human settlement that doesn't even know what you are? How touching that the mighty Supreme Alpha has developed a soft spot for sheep. They're not sheep, and they're under my protection whether they know it or not. You have 5 seconds to retreat before I remind you why challenging my authority is a mistake. Oh, we're not here to challenge your authority, Adrian. We're here to take what belongs to us. Cassius's gaze shifted to Evelyn, and she felt sick at the hunger in those inhuman eyes. The female reeks of untapped power. She'll make a fine addition to our pack once we've awakened her properly. Adrian moved to stand protectively in front of Evelyn, his body already beginning the first stages of transformation. Over my dead body. That can be arranged. The attack came with supernatural speed, multiple creatures launching themselves at Adrian simultaneously. But he was faster, completing his transformation even as he moved, becoming the massive silver-black wolf she had seen before. The sounds of combat filled the night, snarls and growls mixing with impacts that shook the ground beneath Evelyn's feet. She wanted to help, but had no idea how a human could contribute to a battle between supernatural creatures. Instead, she found herself backing toward the house, hoping to reach safety before the fight turned against Adrian. But one of the attackers had circled around, cutting off her retreat with predatory patience. Don't be afraid, little one. it said, its voice a horrible parody of gentleness. "We'll take much better care of you than that noble fool ever could." As it lunged toward her, Evelyn felt something inside her respond to the threat. Power she had never known she possessed surged through her body, and she found herself moving with speed and grace that defied explanation. Her hand shot out instinctively, connecting with the creature's chest, and brilliant silver light erupted from her palm. The attacking werewolf was thrown backward with tremendous force, slamming into a tree with enough impact to shake leaves from its branches. It lay still, either unconscious or worse, while silver fire continued to dance around Evelyn's fingers. The sight of her defensive display seemed to turn the tide of the larger battle. Adrian pressed his advantage, driving off the remaining attackers with renewed ferocity. Within minutes, Cassius and his followers were retreating into the forest, their leader calling threats over his shoulder. "This isn't over, Adrian. The girl's power will attract others, and you can't protect her from all of us." As silence returned to the clearing, Adrian completed his transformation back to human form and approached Evelyn carefully. She was staring at her hands in shock, silver light still flickering around her fingers like captured starlight. "What just happened to me?" she asked, her voice small and confused. "You accessed your heritage," Adrian replied gently, pulling his torn shirt back on. "Whatever supernatural bloodline runs in your family, it's stronger than anyone realized. That was light magic, Evelyn, pure defensive energy that very few beings can channel. But I'm human. I'm just a librarian who likes old books and quiet evenings. I don't have magic powers. You're human, yes, but you're also something more. The dreams that led me to you weren't just about finding a mate. They were about finding someone who could bridge the gap between the human and supernatural worlds, someone who could stand as an equal beside creatures like me." Evelyn sank to her knees as the full implications hit her. Everything she had thought she knew about herself, about her place in the world, had been torn apart and rebuilt in the space of one night. The quiet life she had planned, the simple future she had envisioned, all of it was gone, replaced by responsibilities and dangers she couldn't even begin to comprehend. "I can't do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to be whatever it is you think I am." Adrian knelt beside her, his presence steadying despite the chaos he had brought into her life. "You don't have to know how, not yet. But you need to understand that there's no going back to the way things were. Cassius was right about one thing: your awakened power will attract others. Some will want to use you, others will want to destroy you, and a few might want to help you learn to control what you've inherited. And what do you want?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond the immediate crisis. Adrian was silent for a long moment, studying her face in the moonlight, as if memorizing every detail. "I want to protect you," he said finally. "I want to help you understand the gift you've been given and teach you to use it safely. But more than that, I want to be worthy of the trust you showed tonight when you chose to see beauty instead of monstrosity." Despite everything that had happened, despite the revelation that her entire understanding of reality had been incomplete, Evelyn found herself reaching for his hand. The moment their skin touched, she felt a connection snap into place, deeper and more fundamental than anything she had ever experienced with Marcus or anyone else. "The dreams you mentioned," she said slowly. "I think I've been having them too. Not about you specifically, but about belonging somewhere I'd never seen, about purpose I couldn't name. Maybe that's why Marcus's rejection felt like losing something I never really had." "Maybe," Adrian agreed, his thumb tracing patterns across her knuckles. "Or maybe your soul recognized that he wasn't your true mate, regardless of what any ceremony claimed to reveal." As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, reality started to intrude on the mystical night they had shared. Soon her family would wake, The community would begin its daily routines, and she would have to decide how to navigate this new existence while surrounded by people who had no idea that monsters walked among them. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Adrian said, helping her to her feet. "We figure out how to keep you safe while you learn to control your abilities. And we try to stay ahead of every supernatural creature who will want to claim your power for their own purposes." That sounds terrifying. It is terrifying, but you won't face it alone. As they walked back toward her family's cottage, Evelyn couldn't help but glance over her shoulder at the forest that had revealed so many secrets in one night. She had the distinct feeling that this was only the beginning, that forces much larger and more dangerous than Cassius and his pack were already turning their attention toward the little mountain community. But for the first time since Marcus's rejection, she didn't feel inadequate or unprepared for the challenges ahead. The silver light still hummed beneath her skin, a reminder that she possessed strength she had never imagined. And beside her walked a man who had shown her his most dangerous secret and trusted her to see the person behind the monster. Whatever came next, she would face it as someone new, someone who finally understood that her quiet nature had been masking power that could reshape the supernatural world itself. The only question was whether that power would be enough to protect the people she loved when the real threats finally arrived. The emergency meeting of the community council convened at dawn, summoned by reports of strange lights and inhuman sounds that had disturbed half the village. Evelyn sat between her parents in the packed town hall, acutely aware of the silver energy still thrumming beneath her skin, and the way Adrian's presence across the room seemed to anchor her to sanity. Elder Thorne called for order, his weathered face grave with concern. Several families reported unusual disturbances last night. Lights in the forest, sounds that couldn't be identified as natural wildlife. Given recent tensions, we need to address whether these incidents pose a threat to our community's safety. Marcus stood from his seat near the front, his dark eyes sweeping the assembly with newfound authority. "I believe they do, Elder. My grandfather's prophetic dreams have intensified. He speaks of a corruption spreading through the mountains, supernatural forces that will test every tradition we hold sacred." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, fear and skepticism warring in equal measure. Evelyn felt her mother's hand find hers, Helena's grip tight with protective instinct that couldn't ward off the dangers closing in on their family. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, his gaze finding Evelyn with uncomfortable intensity, "the dreams suggest that someone within our community possesses unusual abilities, powers that could either protect us or draw greater threats to our doorstep." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, and Evelyn felt dozens of eyes turning toward her. Marcus hadn't named her directly, but his implication was clear enough to make her father stiffen with defensive anger. Before Thomas could voice his objections, Adrian rose from his seat, commanding attention with presence alone. "Perhaps," he said smoothly, "the community should focus on preparing for concrete threats, rather than speculating about supernatural abilities that may or may not exist. And what would a traveling merchant know about defending a mountain community?" Marcus's challenge carried undertones of territorial aggression that made Evelyn's pulse quicken. "More than you might expect." Adrian's smile held edges that reminded everyone present that they knew very little about this stranger who had appeared so conveniently. "I've traveled extensively through regions where legends prove uncomfortably real. If supernatural threats are indeed approaching, you'll need allies who understand what you're facing." The tension between the two men was palpable, primal in a way that spoke to conflicts deeper than simple disagreement. Watching them, Evelyn began to understand that this confrontation had been inevitable from the moment Adrian arrived in town. Elder Thorne raised his staff for silence. "These are serious matters requiring careful consideration." I propose we adjourn and reconvene this evening, allowing time for private contemplation of... His words were cut short by screams from outside, followed by sounds that made every person in the hall freeze with terror. Inhuman howls echoed off the mountains, accompanied by crashes that suggested large creatures moving through the village itself. Adrian was moving before anyone else could react, his transformation beginning even as he reached the door. But this time, instead of hiding his nature, he let the entire community witness his change from man to massive silver-black wolf. Gasps and cries of shock filled the hall, but there was no time for explanations. Through the windows, they could see shapes moving between the buildings, creatures that walked upright but bore little resemblance to anything human. Cassius had returned with reinforcements, and this time he wasn't interested in subtle kidnapping attempts. "Everyone stay inside," Adrian commanded, his voice carrying supernatural authority that made even the most stubborn residents obey instinctively. "Bar the doors and don't come out until I give the all clear." But as he prepared to face the threat alone, silver light began to emanate from Evelyn's position. The power that had awakened the night before was responding to the danger, growing stronger with each passing second. "No," she said, rising from her seat despite her parents' protests. "I won't hide while others fight battles that are partially my fault." "Evelyn, you don't understand what you're suggesting," Adrian replied, though his golden eyes showed pride alongside concern. "I understand that these creatures want my power, and I understand that running won't make them disappear. If I have abilities that can help protect this community, then I have a responsibility to use them." Marcus stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "If supernatural forces are truly threatening us, then I was wrong about your strength, Evelyn, catastrophically wrong." The admission cost him visible effort, but before anyone could respond to his attempt at reconciliation, the town hall's heavy doors exploded inward. Cassius entered in his hybrid form, flanked by creatures that defied description. They moved with coordinated purpose, surrounding the terrified humans while keeping their attention fixed on Adrian and Evelyn. "How touching!" Cassius snarled, his voice carrying clearly despite his inhuman vocal cords. The great supreme alpha hiding among sheep, playing at being civilized. And look, he's brought his little pet sorceress to the slaughter. "Last warning, Cassius," Adrian replied, power radiating from his massive form. "Leave these people in peace, and I'll consider allowing you to retreat with your lives." "Oh, but we're not here for the sheep, Adrian. We're here for justice." "Do you know what happens when a Supreme Alpha abandons his territorial responsibilities to chase romantic fantasies? Other packs move in to fill the vacuum. Hundreds of innocent creatures have died because of your obsession with this human." The words hit Adrian like physical blows, and Evelyn could see the guilt they carried finding its mark. Whatever position he held in the supernatural world, it came with responsibilities he had temporarily abandoned to find her. "That blood isn't on my hands," Adrian said, but his certainty seemed shaken. "Isn't it? How many more will die while you play house in this quaint little village? But don't worry, we're here to solve your problem. Once we eliminate the distraction, you can return to your duties like a proper leader." Cassius gestured to his followers, and they began advancing on the cowering humans. But before they could reach their targets, Evelyn's power exploded outward in a barrier of silver light that sent several attackers flying backward. "You want my power so badly," she called out, her voice ringing with authority she had never possessed before. "Then face me directly instead of threatening innocent people." "Gladly," Cassius replied, his attention shifting entirely to her. "Though I should warn you, little sorceress, that raw power without training is more dangerous to its wielder than its targets." The battle that followed was unlike anything the Quiet Mountain community had ever witnessed. Cassius attacked with supernatural speed and strength, his claws seeking vital points with predatory precision. But Evelyn met his assault with shields of silver light that turned his strikes aside, her instincts guiding defensive maneuvers she had never learned. Adrian joined the fight as her partner rather than her protector, the two of them moving together with synchronization that spoke of deeper connection. Where her light-based attacks drove back multiple enemies, his physical prowess eliminated specific threats with surgical efficiency. But the real revelation came when Marcus suddenly joined the battle, his own transformation shocking everyone present. Unlike Adrian's magnificent wolf form, Marcus shifted into something that was part human, part bird of prey, his arms becoming wings tipped with razor-sharp talons. "Shapeshifter bloodlines run deeper in this community than anyone suspected," he called out as he dove at one of Cassius's lieutenants. "My family has hidden our heritage for generations, but some threats are worth revealing secrets." The tide of battle began to turn as other community members showed abilities they had long concealed. Elder Thorn's staff blazed with emerald fire as he chanted words in a language older than recorded history. Mrs. Patterson, the sweet elderly librarian, moved with lethal grace that suggested predatory training far beyond her apparent nature. "A sanctuary," Evelyn whispered, understanding flooding through her as pieces of a larger puzzle finally came together. "This entire community is a sanctuary for supernatural refugees." "Very good," Elder Thorn said, his voice carrying new resonance as his hidden nature emerged. "For 3 centuries, this village has sheltered those who sought peace between human and supernatural worlds. Your family, Evelyn, were among the founding bloodlines, though that knowledge was buried to protect future generations. The revelation that her entire life had been built on carefully maintained secrets should have been devastating. Instead, Evelyn felt pieces of herself clicking into place, explaining the intuitive connections she had always felt to local folklore and her inexplicable ability to read the truth behind ancient stories. "Which makes your presence here even more suspicious, Supreme Alpha," Cassius snarled, though his forces were clearly losing ground. "What interest could the leader of the Western Territories have in a human sanctuary?" "The same interest he's always had," a new voice answered from the doorway. An elderly woman entered, her silver hair gleaming with its own light, power radiating from her small frame in waves that made even Cassius step back. "Adrian came here because the prophecy of unity foretold that his true mate would be found among the sanctuary bloodlines." "Grandmother," Evelyn gasped, recognizing the woman who had supposedly died when she was 7 years old. "Hello, dear one. I'm sorry for the deception, but some gifts can only be passed down when the recipient is ready to accept their full heritage." As understanding dawned, Evelyn realized that her grandmother's death had been carefully staged to allow her to take on the role of sanctuary guardian, protecting the community from exactly the kind of threats they were facing now. "The prophecy of unity," Adrian said, his voice filled with wonder as he completed his transformation back to human form. "I thought it was just legend." "Most prophecies are until they're not," the elderly woman replied with a smile. "Evelyn, dear, you are the bridge the prophecy spoke of, the one who could unite supernatural communities that have been fractured by centuries of mistrust and territorial conflict. Your light magic doesn't just defend, it heals the rifts between different supernatural species. And you," she continued, turning to Adrian, "are the leader strong enough to enforce that unity once it's established. Together, you represent the possibility of lasting peace." Cassius laughed, though the sound held more desperation than humor. "Pretty prophecies won't save you when the real threats arrive. Do you think my pack is the extent of opposition to your little unity fantasy? There are ancient powers that feed on supernatural conflict, entities that will do anything to prevent the peace you're describing." "Then we'll face them together," Evelyn said, her hand finding Adrian's with instinctive certainty. "All of us. Human, shapeshifter, magical bloodlines. Everyone who believes in something better than endless war." The silver light that had been flickering around her throughout the battle suddenly expanded, encompassing not just Adrian, but every person in the hall. As it touched them, Evelyn could feel their individual natures, their fears and hopes and hidden strengths. More importantly, she could feel the connections between them, the bonds of community and shared purpose that made them stronger together than they could ever be apart. Under the influence of her power, old grievances began to dissolve. Marcus approached them, his hybrid form settling back into human shape as he extended his hand to Adrian in a gesture of respect between equals. "I owe you both an apology," he said, his voice heavy with genuine regret. "I sensed that Evelyn was destined for something greater than I could offer, but instead of celebrating her gifts, I let fear convince me she was lacking. That shame belongs to me alone." "Accepted," Evelyn replied, surprising herself with how easily forgiveness came. "You weren't wrong about my destiny, Marcus. You were just wrong about what that destiny meant." As Cassius and his remaining followers retreated, defeated but not destroyed, Adrian pulled Evelyn aside for a private conversation that would determine both their futures. "The prophecy your grandmother mentioned," he began carefully, "it's not something that can be forced or arranged for political convenience. The unity it describes only works if it's built on genuine love and mutual respect." "Are you asking if I love you?" Evelyn smiled, feeling more confident in her own skin than she ever had before. "Because after watching you risk everything to protect people you barely know, after seeing how you treat my power as a gift rather than a threat to be controlled, I think the answer should be obvious. And I love you for seeing beauty in my monstrous nature, for choosing courage over safety when your community needed protection, for being exactly the partner I never dared hope I might find." Adrian's confession carried the weight of absolute truth. Their first kiss tasted of silver light and moonlight, of destiny fulfilled and futures rewritten. Around them, the sanctuary community began the work of healing and rebuilding, but their foundation had been fundamentally strengthened by the revelation of their true nature. Over the following months, as word of the sanctuary's existence spread through supernatural communities, Evelyn discovered that her role as a bridge between worlds was more complex and rewarding than she had imagined. Refugees arrived seeking safety, former enemies came requesting mediation of ancient disputes, and slowly, carefully, the vision of unity described in the prophecy began to take shape. Marcus proved himself a valuable ally, his aerial shape-shifting abilities making him an ideal scout and messenger. The guilt he carried over his initial rejection of Evelyn transformed into fierce dedication to protecting the sanctuary and everything it represented. Adrian divided his time between his responsibilities as Supreme Alpha and his growing role as Evelyn's partner in diplomacy. Together, they developed new models for supernatural governance based on cooperation rather than domination, healing old wounds between species that had been enemies for centuries. The little mountain village that had once hidden its magical nature became a beacon of hope for creatures who had never dared dream of peaceful coexistence. And at its heart stood a woman who had transformed from a rejected librarian into the architect of a new world, paired with a man who had learned that true strength came not from ruling through fear, but from inspiring others to be better than they thought possible. On the night of their formal mating ceremony, held under a full moon with representatives from dozens of supernatural communities in attendance, Evelyn looked out over the assembled crowd and marveled at how profoundly her understanding of herself and the world had changed. The girl who had once doubted her own worth now stood as a leader whose power could reshape the fundamental structure of supernatural society. The man who had once ruled through isolation and duty now governed through love and shared vision. As silver light danced around them in patterns that spelled out ancient blessings in languages older than human civilization, Evelyn understood that her story wasn't ending but truly beginning. There would be new challenges, other threats to face, more bridges to build between seemingly incompatible worlds. But she would face them all beside someone who saw her not as lacking, but as complete, not as weak, but as powerful beyond measure, not as a burden to be protected, but as an equal partner in creating something unprecedented and beautiful. The rejection that had once devastated her now seemed like the necessary catalyst that had launched her toward her true destiny. And in Adrian's golden eyes, she saw not just love, but recognition of the fact that some bonds transcend species, prophecy, and even the careful plans of those who think they understand fate. Their unity had indeed changed everything, just as the prophecy foretold. But more importantly, it had proven that love, when built on mutual respect and shared courage, could overcome any obstacle and heal wounds that had festered for centuries. Under the mountain stars that had witnessed so many transformations, Evelyn Blackthorne began the greatest adventure of her life, secure in the knowledge that she had finally found her place in a world far stranger and more wonderful than she had ever dared imagine.